All right, good morning, everybody. We'll go ahead and get started. My apologies for getting started a few minutes late. Busy time of year for all of us. Uh, First of all, old business. We'll ask for any discussion related to the February 14th, 2024 committee meeting minutes. And if there are none, would entertain a motion to approve.
President Benson, I'll approve.
Okay, we have a motion from Regent Parasker, second by Regent Dicus. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, minutes are approved. Next, follow up on any issues raised during our March 5th teleconference call. My notes don't indicate any. We just wanted to make sure my fellow regents didn't have any follow-up conversation. All right. Hearing none, we'll move into new business. Review State University's annual financial reports, including composite financial index and current year budget outlook. And first of all, from Emporia State, Angela Wolgram. Angela. You bet. Yeah, push the mic button till it goes green. There you go.
You're gonna have to help me from the beginning. Okay. Good morning.
Good morning.
As the new one to the group, I thought I'd take a couple of seconds to introduce myself. My name is Angela Wolgram, and I've worked at Emporia State since 1997. And I'll pause while you do the math on that, but it's been a while. I started as an accounting specialist in the controller's office, and I've worked my way through different positions in the finance area, where I recently most likely have served as the budget director and currently as interim vice president for finance. Oh, there he is. I was just gonna say, I'm gonna talk about wit and he's not here.
Well, I should leave then.
No, you should sit. Yeah, there you are.
Trying to sneak in a big way.
It'd be nice to me now. So last year, I remember listening to these presentations, and Regent Winter's question was, how do we know, based on the information we get, when a university might be in trouble or have challenges? And my thought was, well, I'm not sure one presentation actually will completely do that. At the universities, we have lots and lots of data. These presentations show you data, but somehow we need to be able to share the data, information behind the data. So let's see if I can share that information with you. So our first slide is our snapshot of where we are midway through the year. We'll focus on the red circled numbers there. So for our revenue, we are at 46.7 to date through December 31st. Our cash revenues, we budgeted at 8.6. As you can see, we've not done anything there, and we won't do anything if we don't need to pull from reserves in order to make our budget work. Our tuition is at 57%. I feel like I'm yelling. Okay. Our tuition is at 57%, which is a little bit higher, mainly because we have some accelerated programs that start at different times throughout the year. And our state general fund is sitting at 50% for presentation purposes. Down on our expenses line, you'll see we're at 43.3%. That is not much variance from our traditional spend rate. For 22 and 23, we were both at 41 and 42%. What you can't see on this slide is what our tuition revenue was last year. So last year we were at a little about 23 million, and this year we're at about 21 million. And that is down. What I want you to know is we knew it would be down. And when I spoke to the controller last week, she told me where we were to date, and we are about $10,000 off of where we expected to be. So even though we are down, we did a really good job at estimating where we would be. So the next slide, I think the story really is here in the next couple of slides. This slide shows why we have to look at how we change, how we provide our quality education to our students with the change in resources. If you see where the delta, I thought I have a pointer, but I don't, where the green highlight begins back in 2010, you'll see that's the delta where our tuition as a percentage of our revenue began being higher than our SGF. But really, if you look back, since we started all the way at 1981, what you'll see is in the 1990s, you'll see that that's where we started losing some state funding, and it began narrowing in the 2000s. And I share that because here's the challenge. As a regional, when we lose state funding, we're not going to be able to make up for that in tuition increases alone. We have to continue to offer affordable option for higher education, but maintaining affordability in conjunction with increased salaries, rising inflation, and the need for spending on cybersecurity insurance, other contract rate increases, et cetera, makes it become much more challenging for us. So to help understand this, at ESU, a 1% tuition increase will net us in revenue about $200,000 to $250,000. So looking at like the NIST funding that we received this year was $1 million. So in order for us to make that up in our budget would be a 4 to 5% increase in tuition. The next slide is our operating expense by program. So over the last 5 years, you can see we've grown about $5 million in spending. Some notable changes I want to point out are in the academic support and the student services area. Like everyone, we are focusing on advising and student retention efforts. Most of those expenses lie in that area. Our physical plant operations, there's also been a big increase there with our increased spend on deferred maintenance, demolition funds that we've received and capital renewal dollars explains that increase there. Our scholarships from 22 to 23 took a big drop of $3 million. We had a lot of HERF money in 2022 that was delivered to our students in the form of scholarships. So that 5.5 is a much more reasonable spend rate for our scholarships going forward. Athletics, probably one of those places that most of us don't want to talk about, but there is quite an increase there. So I'm going to explain why. Our athletics program is at the bottom of the MIAA when in funding received from the institution, and it has been for years. I think probably since I've been on campus. And this is one of the places where we've committed to investing. I grew up in a small town in Western Kansas, not really thinking that I would attend higher education until my coach approached me about possibility of playing sports. So I did. I got the opportunity to be a student athlete. You can ask me what I did later. I don't have a crystal ball, but I believe that it's highly probable that I might not have moved on with my higher education had I not received that scholarship to play sports. And I know there are so many other people that have that same story. It provided me with a sense of belonging and connection that we all need, and it gave me the belief that I actually could attain my bachelor's degree. We have never fully maximized our equivalencies within the MIAA at Emporia State University. And so we don't have a lot of what we call full rides at ESU. We spread that out so we get a little bit to quite a few students. And so that increase there is mostly related to what we call grants and aid, which is scholarships in the athletics area. Our next slide is our key financial ratios. This is another data point that I think, I think his name was Troy last month, suggested that we look at it as a trend. We are at 6.78 this year. It has gone up. They talked about the 3.0 mark being kind of that spot where you'd want to start asking questions. For those, when we've been around that mark, we were using resources to invest in different things or we had big fluctuations in our foundation's investments. I had our controller's office pull out our foundation information to see kind of what our CFI would look on its own, and we would hover around 3.5% to 4% annually. Both our primary reserve and our net operating ratios increased slightly, but remained stable from 22 to 23. Oh, also, both our debt burden and our bond coverage ratios also indicate sufficient net assets to satisfy debt. So our debt slide. At Emporia State University, we have 2 debt issuances currently outstanding. We have the union, and we also have our housing debt. From 25 to 26, you'll see a change in that housing debt. That's because we, when we went out for our housing issuance in 2017, we refinanced a 2005 issuance, which reduced our interest and has allowed us to pay that off in 2025. We did ask the legislature last year for bonding authority for our nursing building and this year for an energy savings project. As you know, we didn't have to go bond the nursing building because of the generous gifts that we received, plus the additional ARPA funds. We've been able to fully finance that without asking for the bonding. But as soon as the legislature closes this year, I assume we will be looking at how to finance that ESCO project. So this slide and the next slide are comparing ourselves to, this one is the MIAA as far as how our tuition and fees compare. You can see there we are on the second from the bottom, and looking at our designated and our aspirational peers, we are there at the bottom as well. In both, that shows that we're meeting our goals of being one of the most affordable options for our students. And we really try to maintain that. Oops, go back. All right. So when I was showing someone these slides earlier, they made a comment. I thought it made sense. They said, this is really where our 800-pound gorilla lies right here. And it's not Pittsburgh, right? Like it's not, it's not Pittsburgh. It's ESU's headcount. That is where we have our challenge. You can see here on this slide, this is a residency slide. That even last year, when we began offering our in-state rates to our lower 48 states, we still primarily serve Kansas students. And we did anticipate some of that drop. Our annual credit hour production, again, is an interesting slide because it shows currently we're at about a 50-50 for on-campus versus off. And if you go back a few years, like 2017, 2018, it's more of a 70-30, definitely where we are trying to put our focus on in growing our on-campus enrollment. More students on campus means more students in our residence hall, which provides better retention, better student success. More students on campus will help our auxiliary departments that are funded by our campus activity fees. And earlier I spoke about our athletic scholarships, but also we are focused on growing our enrollment through other talent-based scholarships like visual and performing arts and our teaching. So as I end my presentation here, I thought I'd share a quick story with you. In 1998, an underachieving British rowing team set themselves a crazy goal of winning the Olympic gold medal in only 2 years. They developed a whole new way of working by challenging everything they did by asking one question: will it make the boat go faster? If it did, they would keep doing it. And if it didn't, they would try something different. So for 2 years, the crew lived by this question. Slowly and surely, their performance improved. And on the 5th of September, 2000, they won the gold medal in Sydney. I tell you this story for a few reasons. ESU has developed a whole new way of working by challenging everything we do and making sure that we are answering our questions. Are we providing the programs our students want? Will it increase our on-campus student headcount or help with our student retention? Did it work? And if it didn't, what do we need to do differently? Change also takes time. And finally, what we've realized is that just because we are changing things doesn't mean that we were doing it all wrong before, and that the folks who were leading us didn't do the right things. It just means that we're facing new challenges and needing to work differently. And that is going to be what makes the change at Emporia State University. I hope my presentation has started to help answer some of your questions. Thank you.
Great information, Angela. Questions or comments for Angela? Yes, Regent Winter.
Angela, thank
You
you.
want to turn your mic on?
Good presentation, well prepared and well researched. Can you identify one or two things that so far have made the boat go faster?
Yep. So absolutely. We are focused on, like I said, our on-campus students. Working to make sure that we're bridging the gap in admissions is one place. So making sure that once we have a student that's interested in it, that we're following that all the way through. I think what we found was some gaps and some challenges in some of those areas. I think we're also working on making sure that the programs that we know our students want are the best that they can be.
What have been the trends with respect to student success and spending on enrollment management, that whole.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's a little soon to tell. We did just get an email from the president this weekend saying, I want to start looking at some additional information on what are the things that we've done in the last year and how are they doing. It is a little early, but yeah, we're definitely starting to look at what that does.
Thank you. Well, I appreciate everything you're doing and everybody on campus is doing. It's critically important for our students and for the success of people in Kansas that Emporia State thrives and is a great option for our students. Thank you.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Well said. Regent Prasker?
Yes, Regent Benson, thank you for your presentation today. I'm at the slide 9 and I want to get some historical reference as to,
All head count by residency?
yes.
Okay. I will do my best.
Okay, so I see that the numbers in about 2015, 2016 are so much more healthier than what
On campus,
has been.
correct?
On campus, international, or not so much of non-residential, but for some reason, non-residential kind of grew.
Mm-hmm.
And then resident is falling
Mm-hmm.
consistently.
Yeah.
Do we know why?
It's a good question, and I'm not sure I'm the person to answer that for you, but I definitely will ask the question and get someone to send you that.
Okay, thank you so much.
I do know that some of our international change has to do with some of the areas where we were getting a lot of students from. They don't necessarily promote going to the US for,
Hmm.
I believe the Saudi was a big draw for us, and we no longer, they no longer support paying their students to come here. So we
Saudi Arabia,
Mhm.
there is some changes happening there,
Mhm.
like literally recently.
Really?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, so we
So-
really had a big group of folks
Okay.
back in the early 2015, 16, that area.
Okay, in fact, a trade mission is going to Saudi Arabia this December for education
Okay,
purpose.
cool,
So if you want to talk about it,
Okay.
I'll talk to you.
that'd be great, thank you.
Very good.
Yes.
Yes, Regent Dykes.
Yeah, comparing page 2 or slide 2 and 3,
Yep,
yeah, is the total revenue budget in the top slide the same number that you're looking at on slide 3?
so this one compared to this one. So so this would only have 2023 data in it, the scissor graph. This one is current year data. So, oh, it does say 2024. I apologize.
So Regent Dykes, slide 3 that we're showing here, this is, I believe,
It's a percentage of our total tuition,
yes.
not a dollar amount. Correct.
So but this is, at first I saw total and this isn't, it's total general use revenues though,
Correct.
so.
Correct.
It is in a sense, but showing
then-
it as a proportion, and then this slide is just a static amount for the current year.
That's our budget, yes.
But I guess my question, or why I'm asking is, on slide 2, the state general fund is 54 million out of 84 million,
54 million, what?
out of 84 million.
Correct?
But on the graph slide,
Mhm.
you're showing that the state general fund is only about, what, 35%?
Correct.
And 54 out of 84.
A lot of that is one-time money. So within our 54 million is 9 million one-time money.
Okay.
And then also the NIS money became one-time money as well. So we didn't graph that in there.
Okay.
Good question, though.
That is good. I've said
Trying to
that when
see
I
if
was
my
on slide.
Higher education math work.
Any other questions or feedback for Angela? All right, great presentation. Thanks so much. All right, next up, Ethan Erickson, Kansas State University. Welcome, Ethan.
Good morning. Thank you for letting me be here. I was frantically trying to think of a nautical theme way to start my presentation, but I came up dry. So thanks for letting me be here. Was that okay? Was that okay? Okay, all right. The presentation.
Jeff, is that K-State humor?
There we go. Wanted to start with just a brief overview of some of our top initiatives, and really probably the initiatives focused primarily within administration and finance at this point. But on the next slide, what you'd see, oh wait, I have the power, don't I? On the next slide there is, obviously we've just completed and launched our new strategic plan. We launched that last September. And it has 10 different imperatives, all aligned to grow enrollment, retention rates, research, fundraising, our economic impact to the state of Kansas, and as well as a component of that strategic plan, which is around pursuing continuous improvement in our operations at the university. So all those areas are our focus that we're moving into for the next through 2030 under the strategic plan. And so some of those supporting components that we've already got in motion that are going to be supporting for our efforts in moving in the strategic plan is obviously we are up for and are officially launching in this month the campus master planning effort for all 3 of our physical campuses. We'll have, and you all should get invites to provide input into what our campuses should look like. And how we should be serving our stakeholders and all of our stakeholders for the future. We also are looking at our university's budget model. So in essence, how are we allocating our resources at the institution, and are we allocating them in a way that advances our strategic imperatives? One of the other things that we have in there is an imperative aligned to have the next gen K-State workforce. And so a component of that is going to go back and look at how is our workforce structured? How are we compensating our workforce, and then devising ways that we are recognizing and rewarding our employees appropriately. And so that's an effort that we really haven't undertaken in the past. We're going to be launching that later this year as something to really dive into and make sure that we've got our workforce and compensation in alignment with where we need to go. Some of the other major initiatives, obviously, is key to us is all of the capital renewal funds that have been allocated to the system-wide, but specifically for K-State. Just want to give an update quickly. We have obligated all of our FY24 dollars. Those projects are in motion. You'll see in the next couple slides, the actual spend on those projects gets a little slow as they have long lead times and takes quite a bit of time to get through the planning phase. We also have several demo projects underway right now. I've got a picture of one. This was taken back in January. Actually, it looks a lot different than it does there in that picture. We have taken down the gymnasium and natatorium that was attached to our field house, Ahern Field House. Field house still stands, just make sure we're clear on that. So we're making great progress on that space. And then our other demo project that we had in motion is our Edwards Hall, which was back in the 60s, an athletics dorm, then turned into an office space, and it was time for it to go. So those 2 projects are in place. Next up is our demo project of Weber Arena. And so that's part of our ag facilities project, one of our largest group of projects, about 5 different projects, valued about $210 million. Putting in place a new livestock arena, a new agronomy research area, renovations to our Call and Weber Hall, as well as a new facility, our Global Center for Grain and Food Innovation, which will go in between Call and Weber. To make that all happen, we needed to take down Weber Arena. It holds a special place in many people's hearts. But it was time for us to move into a more modern area. We actually just held our last rodeo in there this spring, so it was kind of a fun event to be there. The other one that we have visited with you all about is our recent cyber incident. And so some of our initiatives, out of every event, there's always a silver lining for us. And so what that event has precipitated us is us moving even faster on some university-wide technology projects that we had in motion. Again, all aligned to continuous improvement, but we're going to accelerate, and I've already launched adoption of Concur, which is a travel and expense module technology. We've pushed that out big bang university-wide and are in the midst of using it. It actually gets us out of about 20-year-old technology we were using in-house to process all of that type of activity. And then we're making further movements in other areas to continue that side. The other one that we've accelerated is a time and attendance project. Right now, we have about 7 different systems that we use at our institution to record time and attendance. We're going to go to 1. Yes, yes, I know. I have that same reaction lots of times too. So we're going to go to 1, and we are going to do that in about 6 to 8 months. And so we are moving very fastly to adopt some university-wide standards and technology for the institution. So focusing primarily then on kind of where we're at, both from enrollment, is you can kind of see there our graph since 2014, how our enrollment has changed. Obviously, 2014 was our peak. We have had a significant decline since then till last fall. Last fall was where we saw our first overall enrollment increase, which is phenomenal. We have been for the last 5 to 6 years under very active strategic enrollment management work, trying to make sure that we are doing the things we need to do in order to improve our enrollment outlooks. And so we are starting to see some of those efforts really pay off and turn around our enrollment decline. You see then, obviously, with lower enrollment, our academic year credit hour production has also declined as well. You'll see then all the way even to the academic year 2022-2023. So let me make sure we're aligning our years here with these graphs. Prior slide, you'll see the increase in fall 23. That's representative of 23-24 academic year. Since that's not complete, you're still just seeing that prior fall 22 production there, and why that you're not seeing an increase in credit hour production in that last column that would align with that. You have the COVID year where we saw a lot more online delivery than face-to-face, but we've now rebounded. We're still seeing more of that in place within the institution, but we have converted back to primarily face-to-face delivery. Here's a look snapshot at where we stack up in terms of our undergraduate resident tuition and fee profile. This is something that we look at and have a lot of conversations about before we start having discussions internally about should we increase tuition, should we increase our housing and dining rates. We want to make sure that we're looking at that total cost of attendance and where we're at in our pack in terms of our peer and aspiration institutions, and making sure that we're trying to be as affordable as possible. And you'll see we're right there kind of in the middle of the pack on that. Here's a quick snapshot of where we're at for this current fiscal year on the revenue side as a snapshot as of December 31st. We're right at, in terms of our total revenue budget, when you're looking at SGF and tuition, we're right at about that 50% mark, which is good. You might notice a couple areas in there that are a little less than that. And what I can kind of point out there is on the global food systems and that biomanufacturing line, biomanufacturing in particular, that initial year budget is a big chunk of that is going to go to capital improvements to create a biomanufacturing facility within Seton Hall. And so that one, obviously, when you're dealing with capital improvements, there's long lead times from design and then getting the contracts in place and beginning the work. We should see that spend pick up towards the end of the fiscal year. And then we also have equipment as a major component of spend in that line item for the year. And so again, dealing with those long lead times and selections. The other one would be the capital renewal and demo. Again, we've got projects in place. We're working hard to spend those dollars. It just takes a time to get through all of our different phases of expenditure on those projects. Shifting then to the GU expense. Again, spending roughly about that midway point is in alignment. Couple pieces I might point out is the difference in instruction and research. So instruction is lower, research is higher. What occurred is when we set the budget, or after we set the initial budget last May, June, several of our areas did a deep dive to make sure how they were coding their expenditures is actually in alignment with the work being done. And so there was a big effort to shift to research, recognizing that there is a lot of productivity that's actually should have been assigned to research this whole time. And so they're making that shift. So you're seeing that show up in the expense, which is why it's a little different than how we originally budgeted it. And then you'll notice on the debt service line, only about 15%. The way our debt service payments are aligned, it's interest only in the fall, the primary principal, and then additional interest payments line up in the springtime. And so you'll see those come out at the end of the fiscal year. Here's kind of a look at our all funds operating expenses, so a slightly different look. Now we're looking at everything that the institution spends from an annual financial report perspective. I would say maybe the main takeaways here is you'll notice we dropped obviously during the pandemic. We started to slowly come back out of that. We are now really coming out of that pretty strong. As an institution, all of our areas are increasing. I would also look at the depreciation line item also increased pretty significantly. That's the result of the completion of some of our athletics facilities coming online, and then obviously higher depreciation coming off of those facilities in that fiscal year. So we're really feeling pretty good in terms of we've really rebounded and we're hitting our stride coming out of the pandemic.
Hey, Ethan, just
Yeah.
real quickly, can you explain what public service would be? So it looks like there's a pretty big increase from last year to 2023.
So a lot of so think about K-State in particular has a lot of public service from our land grant mission side, so extension and extension side of the house. And so I could do a deeper dive to understand really what areas those are showing up in, but I think it's the other thing that we're seeing in here too would be increased in appropriations from the state in 23. So obviously then we're able to increase our outreach from a public service standpoint.
Okay, right. Thank you.
Mhm.
Yes,
Yep.
Regent Winter.
While we're asking a question here, which of the looking at this, this chart, which of those line items directly impact or indirectly impact enrollment? I'm curious about the extent to which spending on improving enrollment, where are we on that?
So you would see obviously instruction as an area that would impact enrollment. So making sure that we're, and where that's going to line up, which you would see on the next slide, is predominantly the big bulk of our budget that you're seeing here today is aligned to salaries and wages, so our people. So are we able to pay our faculty and staff appropriately or at competitive levels so that we're bringing in the best faculty, which then aligns with, that enrollment impact. You'd also have student service, which is another area from the NIST spending that you would see in terms of are we providing those support services to students to make sure then that if we've recruited them and they're enrolled and they're active, are we able to then make sure they matriculate or retain into the from freshman to sophomore and then beyond that piece. I would also argue that there is going to be efforts from an institutional support. So overall, how are we doing as an institution supporting all of those areas of the university? That is also a component of helping with impacting enrollment and growing enrollment. So I think those are probably the main areas that I would say would directly impact our enrollment and retention.
So you don't have a single line item which pulls together all the efforts with respect to enrollment management. Oh, and I'm thinking all the way from buying a billboard to student success initiatives from this, all of that. If you don't have it, I'm curious. It seems to me that we ought to have that information from about all 6 of our institutions that are targeted specifically on enrollment management.
Did you?
Ethan, would that not appear generally in your institutional support line?
Some of those pieces would that you've
Yeah.
mentioned. So buying billboards, advertising, some of those would show up in that institutional support, not as a direct student service activity necessarily. So it's going to be mixed in based on the activity that you're doing. So buying a billboard isn't necessarily a student service, it's an institutional support. So, or advertising, that's an institutional support expense.
And then I also noticed that your line for scholarships and fellowships has increased 10.7 million. So would that be also part of your strategy?
That would also be part of the strategy too. Yep.
Good point.
How difficult would it be to pull together in a different category all of these items which are intended to which in effect do are help growth in student enrollment? I'm thinking of all of
Sure.
that stuff that you touched on.
Sure.
So how hard would that be to put that together? And then if we got it from you, we ought to get it from all the other institutions. But I don't want to ask for that, Mr. Chairman.
Well,
It's,
and I may be incorrect, but as I look at these lines, all of them in some way support students and support enrollment management in different ways. So I understand the question, and obviously as much focus as we place on growing enrollment, I think it's incumbent upon us to ask those questions. Is what you're doing leading to increased enrollment? But I think you could probably make a case that every one of these is doing that.
True. Yep.
I might also add, if I can, Mr. Chairman, the structure you see here with the instruction, the lines with going through research down to other expenses, that structure it's a national, all institutions of higher ed use this structure. So it's not necessarily the most natural for someone outside of higher ed to see that list. But that is the structure that is used to report information to iPads, the federal big data system in the sky. And so that you can look at this kind of information from any 2-year college, 4-year college, they're all going to provide it in that format. So we're a little constrained by that.
That's good to know. Please proceed.
So a slightly different view then of the FY23 operating expenditures is to look at really what are we spending those dollars on? So not the activity that we're pursuing, but what are we spending it on? And like I mentioned, the bulk of that spend is on our people at the institution. So compensation and benefits accounts for 60%. You get into depreciation, scholarships and fellowships, and then all those other expenses that come around that support an institution and our activities shows up in that supplies and other service line item. That's why whenever we talk about compensation and how different pay plans are being funded from the state, it's so impactful because that just impacts so much of our institution ultimately and how we move. Similar charts that you've seen in the past, but basically just demonstrating how our general use budget trend has changed over time. And so what we did here is we took a look at and inflated the dollars backwards so that you can kind of compare how our dollars today look back to 2009. Similar stories as what you've heard previously. In 2009, the majority of our budget was funded through the state, about 57% of our GU budget. 43% was funded through tuition, which is the purple line, because everything money is purple at K-State. Then you see obviously for us to make the adjustment to the declining in state revenue that occurred from about 2011 on, we increased our tuition, but that was also at the period of time when we were seeing pretty aggressive enrollment growth until about that 2014-15 period, when you start seeing how our revenue has declined as an institution, to where today we're getting closer to parity between state support and tuition support for our general use operations. Not necessarily, we have obviously seen increases in state support from the governor and the legislature, which we're incredibly grateful for, but still not quite bringing it back to the levels that we would have seen back in 2009. Here's a look at our principal debt outstanding, 22, 23, and 24. The different categories that we have, so between research, parking, athletics, Olathe, our academic buildings, our energy and infrastructure, housing, and student life buildings. You'll notice the uptick then in FY23. That's really the result of the athletics debt restructuring that occurred. So we had some restructuring as they were finalizing their financing plans for their most recent additions of buildings. And so you see that increase hit in 23, and then we're dropping back down in 24 at this point. I would note, we have had ratings calls with Moody's, who has affirmed our rating of AA3 stable. And then we actually just completed last week, or the week before, a call with S&P, who actually affirmed our A+ rating, but actually changed us from up to positive, which is the highest category within that A+ rating. Recognizing sort of how we've been able to manage to our enrollment challenges, but also looking at the state support as well. So thinking about from a debt burden perspective, something that we keep an eye on is where we're at in terms of that particular ratio. So we saw a slight increase from 4.4 to 4.5 for FY23. And just a reminder, it includes our component units, so that would include athletics, but does not include a foundation. Our goal is to remain below 7. With that athletics debt restructuring, that's what kind of ticked us up to about 4.5. And mentioned the Moody's and S&P rating information. What we're tracking for FY25 as potential, well, one's known and a couple are potential debt issuances that would impact this ratio, is looking at our housing strong complex renovations, which have obviously been approved by the board, and we're seeking the legislative authority to pursue that bonding. And then a couple other areas that have cropped up as discussion during the legislative session is a dairy facility, as well as the Salina K. Ayers facility, which is the home for Pure Imagination in Salina. So those two are sort of floating around out there as possibilities for us for debt issuances in FY25. Our CFI, we also saw a slight increase from 5.4 to 5.5, 8 in FY23. We really kind of attributing that to our increased state appropriations that we saw this last year. So, real slight increases. I think the bigger story for us as an institution is if you look at our history in comparison to where we're at today. So in 2018, we were at 2.82. Despite enrollment challenges, despite a pandemic, despite declining revenues, we've been able to keep ourselves financially healthy through that period of time to where we're at that 5.58 score in FY23. So it's really, we've been pretty diligent in how we've been managing to our financial realities across all the spectrums of the institution. Couple topics that I wanted to touch on too is our deferred maintenance, our progress. Oh, was there a question? Okay. Touch on our deferred maintenance reduction, how we've been able to tackle that particular issue. So if you look, our backlog currently is rated at about $488 million. With all of our demolition, all of our investment from capital renewal funds, one-to-one matching funds, all those pieces, including then our College of Ag facility improvements that we will be completing as of phase 3, we will have reduced our deferred maintenance backlog by about $95 million, which is phenomenal for us as we're trying to track that particular issue for the institution. And we're always watching that. We've identified potentially that if we could get another 20 million in demo funds, as well as that would generate another 78 million in deferred maintenance reduction. And so obviously we're watching then how the legislature is appropriating those dollars and ready to deploy those as quickly as we can. And then really, if you go look, what's our need in order to get everything up to a B grade? Ultimately, with today's dollars, it'd be about 12 million is what we would need in order to achieve that B rating for all of our mission critical facilities at the university. So that brings me then to the maintenance assessment. So just, I know everybody's familiar with it, but recognizing that ultimately once that maintenance assessment is fully phased in, that's about at a 2% rate. For us, with today's numbers, that represent about a $50 million annual obligation that we would have to meet. And so what we've tried to do here is just project that out as we're thinking future forward. What's that impact going to be to the university? You'll notice on the column, the columns are what we have funding available in purple, obviously. And then gray is the maintenance assessment as that ratchets up and is fully implemented. And so what you see is with all of our projects, the ag facilities, the demo, the capital renewal, all of those pieces are front-loaded, which then under the board's policy, we're allowed to carry those over and count that prior year expend to help us meet then future year spend. Which for us, the way we've calculated and tracked this where we're at today would carry us through to about 2029. That's assuming, though, that we would continue to receive that system-wide capital renewal dollars at that $20 million level, which we then get about $6 million of that. That would continue in those future years. So we're watching this to make sure, A, are we capturing everything so that we can get the proper credit for it? But recognizing at some point, we're going to run out of runway and then that maintenance assessment will be hitting our budgets pretty hard at that point. So again, looking forward, kind of those fiscal challenges obviously is enrollment, which we're actively working on. I'm going to throw in their cybersecurity threats as something that is going to continue to be something that we're all going to be facing as a system for the future. For us, that's because a lot of reasons, but we have those persistent threats, but also we have a lot of aged digital infrastructure. So we're going to be working on how do we move to more modern systems. And then that faculty and staff recruitment and retention. Right now, we're ranked at about 11th out of our second to last on our Big 12 peers in terms of our faculty compensation. We're obviously looking at that risk mitigation side, our SEM plans. We've got an improvement in our freshman enrollment for fall 23, and we're seeing increased admits for fall 2024. The student success initiatives, the improved state funding obviously is incredibly helpful, but not quite enough to mitigate the impact of inflation. And then for one of our major future forward transitions that we're going to be looking at is moving to more modern enterprise systems for finance, HR, and student. We're going to start undertaking those very shortly, and we'll be moving away from that probably about 20 to 30-year-old technology that we're using today. So with that, stand for any questions.
Great information. Regent Winter, did you have a question?
Can you go back to that chart?
Turn your mic on.
Maybe. Thank you.
The chart on deferred maintenance.
Sure.
While you're trying to find it, it strikes me that that chart predicts a serious problem, serious challenge in a few years. Should we be doing anything now to prepare for that? What's
On the maintenance assessment in particular?
Yeah. 'Cause that's the big thing out there.
Absolutely.
If we don't change it, it seems to me that we're creating a very serious problem for ourselves.
Absolutely.
I'd like a little discussion about that.
So I would again continue to encourage that we advocate for funding from the state. We've shown that this is a very successful partnership when you do those one-to-one matches. So it's a shared responsibility to maintain our facilities. But we actually need it at a higher level for us to be really able to tackle and meet that maintenance assessment in the future. So we've got to have the funding, honestly, behind it.
Okay, thank you.
I might just add then, we have Senate Bill 552, which had a hearing yesterday in Senate Ways and Means, and I understand they're going to work on amending that bill and potentially passing it tomorrow. That creates an 11-year stream of $30 million appropriations to the Board of Regents for the state universities. Essentially, I see it as committing to 11 years of $30 million of where we would have the demolition funding of 10 million and 20 million of capital renewal merged into one fix your buildings kind of fund. So the legislature, at least on the Senate Ways and Means Committee, seems very intent on a long-term commitment to helping us with this.
Good.
That's good. That's great news. I wasn't aware of that.
Yes, this just happened. And I would also just add, I think the information that we've gathered from the third-party assessments and all the work that Director Bristow has done with the universities on collecting the data really has been supportive of that advocacy. So very important.
So is this the Chad bill?
Well,
It should be.
I don't know that Chad would want to
Not
say
putting
that, but
pressure on you, Chad, but-
you might say Senator Billinger's bill. Yes.
Regent Prasker had a question.
I had a question on the slide 10, where we're looking at about 60% of our expenses towards compensation and benefits. I wanted to see, do we have a comparison chart between the universities we compare to? And have that, are we below, above, close? What are we aiming towards?
Did you want to?
I was going to interject. We have the Common Fund Higher Education Price Index information where they examine the basket of goods that higher ed institutions purchase, which would be not similar to what a consumer, an individual person would be purchasing for inflationary estimates. And I believe their information suggests that that is about the number of what institutions spend on their operating budget. It's at least
I'm-
2/3, I think, for staff.
I'm not questioning about the percentage.
Mhm.
What I am want to understand is, do we compare, when we are comparing with different universities for the same talent of professors,
Oh, I see.
where do we stand?
That would be a market study, which is going to be one of our
Yeah.
efforts that we're going to start later this year.
Okay.
Is a compensation study. And so we want to understand that question.
Perfect.
I would argue we've not done one holistically as an institution.
Yeah.
But we need to be able to answer that question.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
I would also add, I think comparatively, we don't fare well in those
Mhm.
comparisons. When we look at Kansas institutions to other states, the state universities are generally tied to what is done for state employees generally, or even less than what other state employees are, how they're addressed in the budget. So
Got it.
Any other questions or clarifications needed from Ethan, Regent Dicus?
I actually have to go to COPS, so can I? No, I'm just kidding. Mhm.
Mhm. Mhm.
You're just the lucky one that
Yeah,
happens
thanks.
happens to be
Appreciate
standing
that.
there. Yeah.
I'm wait.
I see your colleagues are happy to let you.
Yeah, I'm
take
sure they
that.
are.
Yeah.
So a couple of things I might, yeah, sure. No, I got you. So that's honestly, when you go back and you look in time, right? The majority of our funding used to come from the state for our general use operating budget, which is where a lot of our cost of attendance comes from in my mind. And so the more state support that we can get, especially as we're battling our inflationary pieces, that helps us then maintain and keep those costs low. So our advocacy in that area is critical. The other piece I might point out, especially for K-State, that increase that you're seeing, we have a large number of business lines that you might consider it that way. So we've got federal research grants, we've got industry grants, we've got sales and service that we're doing all the time. And so all those activities are bundled up into this picture that you're seeing here. So we really need to be able to separate those two to really have that, I think, more cost of attendance conversation that you're looking at. But in my mind, a lot of it is just, you've got to have the funding in order to meet the needs of the students, your faculty, your staff, your system, your buildings. And that comes from state support, it comes from tuition, and then potentially you have the opportunity of a lever with philanthropy to assist you as well. So it's a complicated mix in my mind, and I don't know that there's one single answer to your question.
Sure.
It is, yep.
Absolutely. It's a good question. All right. Any other questions for Ethan? All right. Thanks so much, Ethan. All right. Next up, our host for the May meeting, Wesley Winch with Fort Hays State University. Welcome.
Thank you. Good to be with you guys today. As we kind of look into this, I kind of laid this out where we're going to look at the revenue side first, and then we'll jump to the expense side. And so we'll be talking more first about the revenues, and then we're going to jump to looking at the expenses of things. So this is our revenues by type, is where our money comes from. About 30% of it comes from the SGF in fiscal year 23. Another 26% from tuition, some restricted fee funds, about 23%, and the rest kind of mixed between auxiliary, federal, and other funds is where our revenues come from. You can see here our enrollment. This is our FTE by residency, and about 60% of our students are Kansans. That's the orange one on the bottom, and another 24% for non-resident and 15% in our cross-border program. As you can see, we've had some enrollment challenges in the last few years. We had this many years of growth. We peaked out at 2020, and since then we've had some decline, and that has continued through 2023. And if you added one more for 2024, we'd be going down again, but a little less. Not that the rate is declining, we're flattening out. So some of our enrollment initiatives are having some positive effect in that way. If next year you'll see it go down again. And the reasons for that are there's more competition in the online space through COVID. We had a lot of online students, and now online students can go all sorts of places to get the market caught up with us a little bit in that area. And we knew that our cross-border program would actually go down this last year. So we kind of planned for that one. We knew that enrollment was going to go down. And we're working really hard to turn that trend around. We have a lot of student success initiatives when you've been asking about that. And we've seen some success with that, with our things like our centralized advising model and things. Our retention rate went up again this year. We're up to 76.6. That's about a 1% increase in our retention. And we believe that's going to have some positive effects on our RFT enrollment as well going forward. Because if we can keep the students we have, that would be a good thing. Additionally, we have some strategic enrollment plans that we do where we specifically say we're going to fund this idea and you're going to go out and see if we can get some enrollment. We've had some success with those. One of those areas that's been very successful is actually social work. We've seen a big increase in our social work students coming into the college right now. And so it's an area of growth for us. And then we have some other initiatives that we're hoping will take effect. They might take effect a little bit farther down the road, like our affiliations and what we're calling professional continuing education. Some of those projects we're doing now that probably won't yield fruit maybe next year, but in the years, 2 or 3 years down the road, we expect to see some good fruit from those initiatives. This is the same kind of basic data, but it breaks it out by credit hour production. And you can see that once again, it peaks out at 2020. Credit hours follows the FTE pretty directly. And between this one, it breaks it out between our cross-border online and on campus versus residency. And so that many of the same things are apply here. One of the nice things is that our applications are currently up for next fall. So we're hopeful that next fall we're up about 200 at this time. It's way too early to know. We have challenges as everybody with the FAFSA deadlines and some of the things. And so it's way too early, but it's always encouraging to have a little up this time of year. That's that. Wanted to show the sources of tuition and where our tuition comes from. Fiscal year 23, we had about $39 million of tuition, and more than half of that, just slightly more than half of that, came from our online. And then on campus and our cross-border programs added another $6 million. It's about 15%, 52%, 33%, and 15% on those. So this is that same, you've seen this graph before with on what the state gives us versus what our tuition is. And you can see the history there. Back in 2010, we were about 58% funded by the state. 42% from tuition, and over time that's grown. It's interesting to note that in 2023, we crossed back over, and we are grateful for the funding from the state. But what that did for us really is our overall tuition on the top has remained pretty flat for the last couple of years. So that top line there that shows our total SGF funding has remained right around 80 million for the last number of years. Okay, want to talk about expenditures now. So this is where our expenses go. This is the same pie chart. We have about 57% of all of our expenditures go to compensation and benefits, and another 20% to supplies and services for the people to run things. And then we have some for scholarship and utilities and depreciation, how it's broken out. But pretty consistent with, I think, most higher ed institutions that I've been at, about 50, somewhere between 55 and 60% of all of our expenditures goes to salaries and benefits. This is our operating expenses 5-year trend. So you can see what's happened last year. This year we were down as compared to last year. And some of the, we're going to continue working to make sure that we keep our expenses low, in a good place for us. Overall reductions are in actually most categories were down. There was a few that were up. The biggest increases were in institutional support and also in depreciation. And the reasons for this, the institutional support is actually where we put our advertising dollars and things to try to recruit students onto campus. And so we put a little more emphasis into that to make sure that we could try to help with our enrollment. The other area of depreciation, a good chunk of that actually is from a new GASB rule 96 that made us capitalize and depreciate software. And so that came into play last year, and about $2.7 million of that is from that particular thing. And there's another $700,000 that's from our ERP Workday expenses that got capitalized and depreciated. So between those, that explains most of the big jump in the depreciation. And everything else was pretty much down for last year. That was because we had a bunch of HEERF money. That was from the COVID relief funds, and they gave us dollars. The federal government gave us a bunch of dollars that we could give out to as scholarship to our students, and we did.
And I've heard that term used a couple of times today. Are you saying HERF?
It's here, it's HEERF, higher education. I don't remember what it stands for, but it's HEERF. So sometimes it's HERF or HEERF. Is how you
I
want
think
to.
it was Higher Education Emergency Relief Fund.
Okay.
Our agency administered the GEAR money, the governor's Education Emergency Relief Fund.
Okay, great. Thank you.
No, that money is gone. As far as the HEERF money for us, we have spent all of it. We received, and we're getting no more from the federal government at this point. In fact, all of our reporting at Fort Hays State is done, and we've finalized our final report for them.
So can we show direct impact for those funds to, enrollment or productivity for the students? Can we show some kind of a stat that receiving these funds had made an impact, positive impact on whatever the intention for the fund was?
I am not 100% certain how I would get I can tell you where the money went. How do we show that had a positive impact on our, I mean, I know that a lot of it went to helping students not have debt. So one of the nice things is that is students are graduating with way less debt because of this money. We spent a good chunk of that making sure that if there was any outstanding payments that it got paid off. And so they left Fort Hays State without owing us money. Now, did that help recruit or put more students in? I don't know exactly how I would tie that together.
The reason I ask is that those information like that would be a great advocacy for when we are talking about helping out universities and actually helping out higher education in general. For the front. Okay.
Talk loud enough. Yeah, you think is if I had less money, scholarship money, I might not come back. Yeah, but your retention rate is up, so very impressive.
And I think some of that is the NIST initiatives that we've been putting into place, honestly, are bearing some fruit for us.
I also observed that for the number of students you're serving, the amount of expenses are significantly well managed. So kudos for you on that.
Thank you. And we try to run a pretty tight ship at Fort Hays State. And we'll get to this a little later about some of the headwinds that we're doing, which do include inflationary challenges that we have right now, which I think is pretty common for all of us. It is for us. So,
Thank you.
all right. So here's our debt principal balance. It takes us through all of the debt that we have from now until that's paid off. Our debt service is really manageable. Our overall current bond debt as of 2024 is only $24 million. And that's decreasing each year between the Memorial Union and student housing and our Student Success Center. And that we're in a good position. If we ever need to get more debt, we could. Our debt service ratio is only 1.3% of our revenues. So very low, very manageable debt service, and don't have any concerns about meeting our debt up. This is our mid-year budget update as of December 31st. And we're tracking really well this year on our GU budget. The 67.3% is somewhat of an anomaly in the way that our revenues came in on an accrual basis. We are not going to get, we're 65 million is not going to be half of what we get. We actually, we are tracking well. We thought our tuition was going to be 41 million, and that's exactly where we're tracking. We budgeted for 41, and we're right on target for that revenue to come in, maybe just a little higher. So even though the tuition says 35.8, that was, we had a lot of students sign up for classes in December. And so we accrued that revenue in December. So that's why we're at 67%, but really we're on target. The other piece on the expense side, 51.8, if you look at the debt defeasance line there, 2 from the bottom, that $6 million that the legislature gave us this year, which we're very grateful for, got paid 100% in July. And so that helped reduce our debt. If you made that so it was only 50%, so you got kind of a, to look at it as the year, we would actually be under 50% overall on our as a percentage of budget. Overall, we are right a little bit above 50% on our revenues and a little below 50% on our expenses. If you take I wanted to make sure you saw though the real numbers so that I wasn't massaging them for you guys, but just recognize that we're on target. All right, I want to talk about our CFI. We are, boy, that yellow did not show up very well in this, so I might have to change that to a darker color next year. But we're back up to 3.25, risen back up to 3.25. We feel our finances are in a good place. Moody's currently is giving us an A1 stable rating. We have our review call with them actually next week. So we'll be on with a friend over there next week. And our financial reviews, our reserves are actually healthy. They've gone up just slightly over the last year. And we're hoping that that trend still continues as we continue to grow and keep those in a good place. This is our peer comparison of where we sit on our tuition and fees per semester. We really try to keep our tuition and fees low at Fort Hays State and believe that this helps with the goal of the board and of the university for access and affordability for students. We pass that along to our students and feel like we still have a very quality education. the quality product that we give to our students. We save almost $1,000 per semester as compared to our closest peer institution. And this is the same thing as compared to the MIAA. We feel like this gives us some really good elasticity if we need to change into the market, if we need to make some adjustments to our tuition and fee structure, that we have a lot of elasticity in place that would not impact necessarily our student enrollment deeply, just because of where we sit compared to everyone. That said, it is not, we want to continue to maintain that place. We feel like it's a competitive advantage for us, and don't have a real desire to jump up high right now. That gives us to our key fiscal challenges. And it's, I mean, if you looked at the charts there, we're having some enrollment challenges. We're doing a lot of things to fix that, but our enrollment is going down, our SCH is going down. That has an impact on our revenues, and the amount of money we're getting out of tuition and fees. The other side of that equation is that we are dealing with inflation, and that is included in our faculty and staff wages and our ability to meet those needs as well. And so we're working very hard on both sides of the equation. So what are we doing about that? And so here are some of the actions that we are taking to address the fiscal challenges. Strategic initiatives, we're doing strategic enrollment planning, and we will continue to do those very specific, targeted. We think we can grow this program, and this is how we're going to do it. And as a broader category is our professional and continuing education, our economic workforce development for the region, including our affiliations project with the 2 technical colleges that we're working with, and the professional and continuing education. We're hopeful that we get funding from the legislature for that this year, but even if we don't, we're going to move forward with this initiative. We think it will be helpful for the region and for the university. We are continuing our student success initiatives to improve retention. Like I said, we've seen some success with that. We've had an increase of up to 76.6% or 1% this year, and that was last year's was up as well. So the trend is good right now in our retention. And our affordability and access. So strategic consideration of all of our tuition decisions as we go forward. We want to be very thoughtful and very careful about what we do on those things on that front. And anything that we can do, or you all do with advocacy and gratitude for the additional state funding, that would be very helpful. There's many initiatives this year on it, and anything that comes from the state is, we're very grateful for that. On the expense side of things, we do a very careful review of every vacant position when they come forward. We look at it and we say, is this the right position? Do we still need this position? And if we do, then, or does it need to be changed? Then we go ahead and push it through. If it doesn't, then we will eliminate it and try to keep the budget in line through attrition when necessary. And continued financial evaluation and strategic action is necessary as we go through looking at the future, and if and what we need to do to make sure we stay in a financially good place. And then always looking for ways to find and implement efficiencies. We are currently, right now, looking at our next iteration of our strategic plan, and we're having those conversations. And part of that is what are we going to do fiscally? So we're looking at the next 3 years and making decisions now for strategically how do we move the university forward. You have questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Regent Presker.
Thank you. Appreciate your detailed information about the university, and looking at your credit hour production, it's pretty apparent that your students want more online than in person.
Yes.
And we want more students coming in. First off, my question is, do you charge them different fees for online versus in person?
Yes, we do.
It's cheaper, I'm assuming.
No, it's roughly equivalent
Okay.
to take an online class to taking it on campus, or maybe even slightly more.
Okay, so your revenue pretty much is the same. But when you go online, your physical requirement for your physical building, students coming in, that decreases. expenses decrease tremendously. So is there a strategic plan to kind of look at your trends and listen to students' requirement and emphasize and the fact that there is so much importance for your online education in your marketing material to attract more students for that purpose?
Yes, we actually have a number of initiatives that we're working on, that we've worked on historically, but updating even now to try to market to those online students specifically and to retain them as well. One of our student retention initiatives is an online space where they can get in and actually have chat rooms and actually and meet together and help with their tutoring with one another and their homework
Mhm.
and connecting through an online an
Portal.
easier online portal, even with their professors, and having professors have um, their uh, their hours where they meet with the
Open,
student, the
open hours.
open office
Yeah,
hours,
yeah.
that it can be an online way of doing that as well. So there's a number of things that we've been doing to try to not only attract but retain our online students.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Any other questions for Wesley? Hey, Regent Winter.
Wesley, I'm looking at the chart. It's FTE by residency that has resident, non-resident, cross-border. What's cross-border and how's it different than non-resident?
Our cross-border are you might call them our international partners. So most of the time when people think of Fort Hays State, they think of our China program. And that is by and large our biggest portion of our cross-border program. And this is different than non-resident because we have our cross-border program, for example, in China between CIOS and SNU, we send our professors over there and they actually are teaching in China, the students. And but it's our professors and it's teaching them, and we have an agreement with those universities about how that funding happens and how the students take credit hours and that we transcript them.
I see a relatively significant decline in the cross-border category in 23. What's the cause? Well, I'll ask two questions. What's the cause of that? And secondly, is the current political uproar about TikTok, is that part of this? I heard on NPR the other day talking about, well, won't China retaliate against us and stop buying things from us, including they're buying education from us. Talk a little bit about that and where that's headed.
So in China, they have the Ministry of Education, which be kind of like Department of Education for the United States. And Ministry of Education gives a number of quotas of how many students that we can have at any time in these programs. And they cap them. We knew we were going to decrease in part because of that. And so there is the larger geopolitical issues, Regent Winter, are real between us and China right now. The reality is our partnership with our two partners over there is actually very strong. There's no desire or any indication between us and our college partners that there's any trouble. We have a good partnership, and as near as I can tell, we've been doing it for 20 years, and we expect to be doing it longer. But the larger geopolitical things are real. You know, TikTok is one piece of it, but there's nervousness, I think, between all folks. I think we'd be remiss not to just admit that. And we have plans in place of what we would do and how we would handle it if something were to happen on that front. I sure hope it doesn't, because it's been a very successful partnership for us for a long time. And I think that we provide a good service and the students are good students, and I think we do. I think the partnership is working. So
Thank you.
Good response. All right. Anything else for Wesley? All right. Next slide, Wesley. All right. Next up, receive debt capacity plans and assessment from the Kansas Development Finance Authority. Mr. Jim McMurray. Welcome, Jim.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. Thank you for having me again to speak regarding debt of the state universities, credit strength, and we'll touch again a little bit on capacity. I'll still have a lot of caveats on capacity because it's also subject to a lot of assumptions. So turning to the first slide, any bond guy, of course, wants to talk about the market context. So we'll go through this pretty quickly. And if I can operate this correctly, oh, there we go. As you are probably not completely insulated from this in your day-to-day work. For much of the past year, the market has been anticipating cuts to the federal funds rate deeper and or faster than the Fed has signaled in their set projections published quarterly. So the graph in the lower right, I'll explain briefly. The vertical axis is the anticipated cuts to the federal funds rate in 2024 in basis points. Our negative numbers going -25 down to -200, 0.25% down to 2%. And the horizontal axis is just the previous year by quarter. And then the two lines are the Fed's signal on how much cuts there would be via a consensus of the board governors and presidents. And then the volatile line, surprise, surprise, is Mr. Market opinion of what the rate cuts will be. So you can see that's quite squiggly. Generally, over the last year, the market's anticipated a lot more cutting than the Fed governors have indicated in their survey. And as happenstance, this afternoon, we'll have another data point when the Fed meets, and the market currently is kind of finally in line with the signal from the Fed back in December. Other items, high-level items from the market, the relative value of tax exemption is quite high at this point, with ratios of MMD, which is a tax-exempt index, versus U.S. Treasuries are very low at this point. 5-year point, 56.2%, 10-year, 56.5%, 30-year at 81.4%. Put that in the context of a federal taxpayer, it's at the top bracket of 37%. They're barely covering or not even covering munis are not even coming close to covering the tax benefit they're receiving from the federal rate. So there's probably, they have to have some other tax consideration, for example, a state income tax rate to help close that gap there. So good to be, on that measure, good to be a borrower at this point if you can borrow tax exempt. And then a final data point would be the last transaction we were involved in for State University on December 12th, Wichita State University's Phase 1 stadium project of $11 to $12 million, which is secured by a Sedgwick County property tax mill. S&P rating received 6 bids at auction, all-inclusive cost of 3.87% tax exempt. It was a 20-year amortization, I believe, so a weighted average maturity of just over 11 years. On this next slide, I realize it's very busy with a lot of data. But I didn't want to lose the resolution fidelity of the individual data. If you're more of a graphical person like me, probably focus on the shading rather than the numbers. So we have a almost 2-decade history of combined 6 state university debt in millions, and then compare that, and also roll in full-time equivalent enrollment over that time frame, the debt per FTE, and then for context, the Kansas GDP. And then each of those data sets have a growth factor. Cells that are highlighted in red are negative years for each of those, and then cells in green are highlighted if it's the growth in that individual year was over 20%. So really not much change from last year. The trend, the significant trends it's bifurcated up through 2016. The state universities started from a low leverage position, have gone up to, they levered up a lot, starting from a low position. And then since 2016, it's tempered off. And it's been a lot more consistent with the change in full-time equivalents. Backdrop of the Kansas GDP, fortunately, is growing and is actually, good, solid, single-digit growth there, which is contributing to the backdrop that we have of a favorable tailwind from state support at this point. And then next, we use Moody's Investor Services when we solicit ratings for each of the 6 state universities. We preferentially use Moody's for 3 factors. One is commercial terms. They're a lot more agreeable and more advantageous on a cost basis. Second effect is their methodology is more favorable to the Kansas higher education situation. And then finally, the market only requires, doesn't require, but the feedback from investors at this point is they've been much more happy to transact with only 1 rating. So it makes no sense to pay for 2 ratings. And the substantial portion of the Moody's credit rating assessment is in a scorecard, which we've broken down here on various factors and then sub-factors with each of their weightings, and then a very brief explanation to me in the far right-hand column of what conceptually that factor is about. Unsurprisingly, size matters, and it matters a lot. And you can't, that's not going to change, year to year a whole lot. The reason why size matters is just the organism, institution, just like a biological, entity, it's a lot bigger. It can absorb shocks, have time to adapt, and it's just, it's not dominated by the environment. It has an opportunity to affect the environment to some degree. Scale factor, adjusted operating revenue, size matters. In market profile, which are qualitative factors rather than quantitative factors, brand and strategic positioning. Again, a larger entity is actually going to usually have a higher brand and strategic positioning because they got big by having good branding and strategic positioning. And they can attract and retain students, faculty, donors, government funding. The operating environment is mostly external to the institution, and we have some tailwinds right now with the state's budget, and that has been noted for some of the institutions. And then getting back to the very beginning of our meeting where Regent Winter was asking for 1 metric to focus on, my choice absolutely would be EBITDA margin, or earnings before interest, depreciation, and amortization. All these factors are important, but if an institution cannot maintain margins, they're dying a slow death. So the data that I have later here shows through, in most cases, fiscal 23. If you want more of a forward-looking, I would, in your budget deliberations and then also in your periodic reviews, I would ask the institution, what kind of margin are you budgeting for? What kind of margin are you achieving? And that can be a very difficult discussion, especially when you juxtapose it against, affordability. But I think each of these business officers, realize that there's, a whole host of constituents that we're all trying to, manage those expectations. And you see, they, even though they may ask for price increases that may seem unpalatable, they're probably also looking at, am I earning margin enough to do this? If I attract marginally 200 more students and they're barely covering my costs, well, that's works great for the students and that's part of the mission, right? But how does that work for the institution on a sustaining basis? When they hit a shock, because they may, as Jeff DeWitt has pointed out, growth has a cost. Did you incur a bunch of debt or other fixed costs in meeting that growth? And when those students go away for some reason, whatever reason that may be, you're stuck with those fixed costs. So one factor to focus on if among us all these is, what is your margin? Can you maintain your margin? Are you budgeting for margin? Or are you just getting pushed around? Other factors, again, total cash and investments operating expense, again, size matters, and also in size matters in relations to what your annual budget is. And actually, where most institutions are scored fairly well on leverage and coverage, total cash and investments, total debt and annual debt service coverage, usually in these scorecards, you're going to see that those factors are not very weak. They're actually kind of a strength. So there's occasionally been narrative from certain politicians or the legislature that we have too much debt. Well, everything else being equal, if we didn't have the debt, things would be great, but we, in theory, achieved something, have some kind of asset from that debt, and things aren't. Everything else isn't equal. We can't just make it go away. And then finally, on the annual debt service coverage, I'll note that for each of these institutions, it's usually a fixed rate debt portfolio, generally level amortizations or level debt service when they're initially structured. Your annual debt service coverage is actually going to just mirror your EBITDA margin. So once again, getting back to margins. And then a final qualitative factor is financial policy and strategy, quality of management, governance, oversight, planning of risk management, and then credibility. These Moody's is having annual calls. S&P does for the two institutions that are rated by S&P. And you may think you're doing great year to year, but they're remembering the conversation or the question you answered 5 years ago. And if it didn't pan out, your credibility, just gradually evaporates. Okay, getting into the scorecard results for each of the 6 institutions, 3 at a time. So for each of the institutions, all the factors, I have the raw value on the left column for them, and then the actual assessed scorecard rating with at the bottom a scorecard indicated outcome, and then the actual sign rating for Moody's. I'll just let the data speak for itself, but do have some notes underneath for each institution. You can read at your leisure. I would unfortunately want to point out for Fort Hays State that there is some vulnerability to the existing rating. Their existing rating is A1, which is 1 notch higher than the other 2 regional institutions. Their last scorecard actually came out at AA3, which is 2 notches higher than their scorecard, indicated scorecard right now. And almost all of that change is attributed to their change in EBITDA margin. It used to be the scorecard grade for each of those factors, the EBITDA margin and the annual debt service coverage has eroded substantially. A 2% margin is not adequate to sustain yourself. So restoring that margin, it should be central to that institution's focus right now. And the other institutions have gone through that gyration as well. It's just so happens that Fort Hays State is, currently in that position. Moving on to Pittsburgh State, Wichita State, University of Kansas. Nothing of note really at this point. Just let the data speak for itself, and refer my notes speak for themselves. More than happy to handle any questions you may have. And then finally, this is unchanged from last year, a capacity discussion. I can calculate whatever number you want. This is so sensitive to any kind of assumptions that you go into this. The 7% annual debt service portion of top line revenue, that is a great starting point, but it should not be the end point. I think if any institution went up to that level, it's a healthy amount. And you really need to dig into the details behind that. Someone spending 7% on debt service is absolutely sustainable if you have 12, 15% margins. If your margins are way down at mid to low single digits, it's way too much. And there's going to be variations along the way. So we're more than happy to do the deep dive, but there's a lot of assumptions that go into that. How is this debt amortized? What are your options to restructure with call options? How do you layer it in with your existing debt profile? Is your debt service decreasing over time, or if you actually accounted for inflation and actually ramping up debt service? There's so many things that go into this. We're happy to take that deep dive with you or any institution at any time. And that's the extent of my prepared remarks. Be more than happy to answer any questions.
That's a lot of great information. Questions? Yes, Elaine.
If I may just add, Mr. Chairman, thank you. In Regents, in front of you, you have a one pager with two tables, one on the front, one on the back, that shows you each of the universities, and we have copies over here, of the debt burden ratio for each of the 6 universities back to 2009 through 2023. A lot of this is shown in the individual presentations that you've seen today and last month, but I put it in an array of a table together for you to see. The debt burden ratio has been mentioned, looking for a rate under 7, and we range from 3.7 to 4.7 as of 2023. The other side is the viability ratio. Generally, you're looking for the standard is your threshold there is a minimum of 1.0, and that would demonstrate that you have adequate net assets to satisfy your debt obligation. So this is information from the composite financial index, which we have a whole array of information for you if you want to see each university's tables. It's a lot of data on one page, but I thought this might be helpful to have this for you in light of these conversations.
Thank you, Elaine. All right, any questions for Mr. McMurray? Yes, Regent Winter.
What should we do if you were sitting up here? What should we do with respect to your 4th capacity discussion item? And thank you very much for making it very clear. But it seems to me that the way you've articulated this is a challenge to us that we should, because you're suggesting that we require the universities include these 3 different ratios. Is that something easy to do? Do we not do that already?
Mr. Chairman, Regent Winter, that information is not explicitly included in each individual issue paper, but we certainly could provide it. That would not be difficult at all.
I think based on the recommendation, it would be appropriate.
That's my point.
Yeah.
Good, thank you. And I take it that, I tend to oversimplify things too much, and this is a complicated area. But I think we talked about, is there one particular ratio or one particular feature calculation that we should keep our eye on a monthly basis as to the financial health of our institutions? And which one is it?
I think on a monthly basis, there's just not going to be enough fidelity to the financial information. Another thing that I would recommend, but it's going to be pretty a heavy lift to implement is a publicly traded company provides financial statements every quarter within 45 days at the end of the quarter. You know, that's a standard that, you know, you're going from financial statements that are not audited on an individual basis annually. And to get to that level is just too much of a leap. But do you consider, you know, audited financial statements at the state university level? They're not audited. They participate in the state's audit process, and they, you know, but the materiality threshold for, you know, any kind of finding is at the state level, not at the university level. Or alternatively, do you say, well, we don't want to do audited financial statements. We don't want to go down, you know, have external auditors, but you have to provide, you know, GASB compliant financial statements twice a year. You know, a lot of the data I see in the governmental process, you know, we kind of are doing it on the cash basis. So you don't necessarily get the full accrual. And a lot of times, you know, there's an incentive to not show that we have lots of money or making money, because then you get into, well, you know, some other entity saying, well, I'm going to decide what you're going to do with that. Whereas you're, as an entity, just trying to survive, or, you know, have money to do something else strategically that you need to do in the market to continue to function, or maybe even grow. So, you know, of the two, I would suggest the possibility of studying, you know, preparing financial statements at 6 months.
We did as a system, I'm going to say it might have been 2013 or 2014. The universities were asked by a former budget director to look into that, and there was a cost estimate developed on what it would take to do that. We can go try to elicit that information again, or look at that information that was pulled and try to inflation adjust it and see what it would take. There would be an expense. It would be a pull.
Anyone on the committee feel strongly one way or the other?
Well, it seemed to me that we have some very competent people, and at the regents level, we have very competent people at the state budget level, et cetera, et cetera. So nothing comes off. There's no alarm that rings in my mind that we don't have audited financial statements. Maybe there should be, but given the visibility that we have in the state's budget division, I personally don't sit here thinking, oh my God, we've got to get these things audited.
It could always be something that we could revisit later if needed. It's a good idea.
Yeah, and to be clear, I suggested the higher threshold initially, you know, just because you asked them to require, you know, provide GASB prepared financial statements doesn't necessarily mean you have an audit.
Any other questions for Mr. McMurray? All right, great information. Thanks so much. All right, in the interest of time, I will just ask my fellow regents if there are any of the items on the board agenda for this afternoon that you'd like to discuss. I think they were all pretty well discussed in detail on our agenda call a few weeks ago. But any of those items that you'd want to pull off and bring before the group today. Okay, now we will move on to any state university deferred maintenance initiative progress. Anything, Chad? Elaine? Okay. Any audits?
No. The only thing I would add, the internal auditors are having a discussion when we might meet with fiscal affairs in the fall to talk about the new reporting standards and how that affects the Board of Regents and our board policy. We're looking at that for this fall.
Thank you. All right, any other business to come before the committee this afternoon? Hearing none, we'll stand adjourned and appreciate everybody.